You're going to get through this.
Easy for this. I was able to do it.
Easy for dancing. I'm not a great lover of cats.
That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are. Not me.
That's my fear.
You're a disgrace, you are.
Hello and welcome to Shadowboxing. Tonight my fellow Shadowboxer again is Paul Whitfield. Paul, it's the third time now you are a guest of Shadowboxing.
It's great to be here too. Well, thank you.
Welcome. And today's topic is the boat people, refugees. And we will see and we'll hear from you the Christian sort of view on the boat people.
Yeah.
Tell me, what's the problem with boat people?
Well, it's a dangerous way of coming to Australia, and one that we've seen some tragedies around. So I think Australians would rather people didn't come to Australia on leaky boats, and the government's wanting to, both sides of government is wanting to stop that. But the problem is they've got a valid claim to be here in Australia. We're a signatory to the United Nations Protocol on Refugees, and that recognises that everyone in the world, even people who are stateless, defenceless,
yes,
have a right to seek asylum here in Australia. They have a right to be refugees here.
So probably we got these days, 40 million people around the world who are refugees. Can we accommodate all of these people?
Oh, it would be difficult for Australia to accommodate 45 million people all at once. But we do have an opportunity to accommodate some of them, and not all of them want to come to Australia, may I say. Lots of them would like to go to other parts of the world, and we are very small players when it comes to accommodating these refugees. I wanted to bring a Christian perspective,
yes,
and I think Jesus would want Australia to show compassion, mercy, and do what it can with our resources to welcome as many of these stateless people as we can. That might not be 45 million, but it might be a lot more than the 17,000 who came to Australia last year. I think we've certainly got the capacity to accommodate them.
That many, if they're coming on the right way, not on a leaky boat.
Yeah, so last year it was 17,000 who came to Australia on a leaky boat. There were also arrivals...
What is the difference, Paul, from the Christian point of view? If it's a leaky boat or a plane which lands in Sydney, and everyone is going to the airport and going back or coming in. So what's the difference between the status of the refugee on leaky boat or on the airplane? Tell me.
No difference. I think Jesus, Christian perspective, Jesus would want us to show mercy to both. Whether people come here illegally by plane or illegally by boat, they're not illegal immigrants. The UN says that you can't call them illegal immigrants. It recognises that refugees will be in a desperate situation, and although they might break laws to get to a place where they seek asylum, they still have rights recognised by our government as we've signed these declarations that the UN has put together. And we've got a long track record of honouring those commitments, and today we need to honour those commitments again. The Christian perspective is that these are people. Primarily they're people. They're not boat people or plane people or asylum seekers overseas. They're people with human rights.
And want to survive. People who want to survive.
People who their value is rooted in what God's made them to be. Whether they are being honoured by their country of origin or persecuted by their country of origin, they're still people. And God cares about them, and he wants us to love our neighbour. Jesus told an amazing story.
Yes, which one was that?
It was called The Good Samaritan. It was about who do I have to love? Okay, so I might want to... He told it to Jews. They were asked, questioning, who is my neighbour? I know that God wants me to love my neighbour, but can I limit that down? That's a bit of a big job, isn't it? Perhaps if I can just love Jews. And so Jesus told this amazing story about their enemies, the Samaritans, who they hated, they wouldn't speak to, they wouldn't even pass through their territory, let alone go inside their house. He told a story about a Samaritan who loved a Jew.
And that was the Good Samaritan.
The Good Samaritan, just out of compassion. And then he said to the Jew who had wanted to limit who their neighbour was, he said, go and do likewise. Go and show mercy, just like that Samaritan showed mercy.
But if I remember of my reading of the Bible a long time ago, somehow God has made some exceptions in the stories of rescuing the world or rescuing people. Just go back to the first great boat story and the refugees on the boat, which is Noah and Noah's ark. And God decided to give Noah a chance to rescue as much as he can from the world. And he decided to rescue all the animals. And I haven't heard anything about rescuing people on the boat, apart from the animals, and even the animals, 2 of them only. And I have to think, where was God's decision in his head when he said to Noah, this is your task, you can do it, you will, establish new life if you rescue all these animals. And there's not a line about rescuing the migrants or the refugees by Noah. So I think that was a little bit crude.
The Bible presents 2 great themes, justice and mercy. It presents God as just and as merciful. And I think the story of Noah and the ark is a perfect example of that. God's just, he judges the world for the way people have been behaving in it, and he shows mercy to Noah and his family, to 12 people in all. And
to the animals.
And to some of the animals.
Kingdom.
You're right, some of the animals. He hasn't abandoned his plans to bless the world. He shows mercy to some people and some animals.
People and the animals.
That's a theme that certainly runs through the entire Bible. It's a theme that Jesus...
It's like the Greens, okay? They say animals got rights. Obviously, they're saying refugees got rights. But go back to the refugees. First of all, why don't the world is working on stop the trouble, which cures the refugees and the influx of refugees, usually war, which we, Western world, forcing into some of the small countries. We know the 3 last wars, Iraq, Iran, we've been all and everywhere. And we never solved the problem. And the refugees still coming from Syria and everywhere. And we never, as Western world, seriously say, hey guys, first solve the problem because then we're not going to have refugees. So where are the priorities? We somehow, as Christians, or the Western world, based on Christianity mainly, missing the point. Why aren't we solving the problems first?
I think they're both good questions. I think the question about justice and mercy is a good question. I think the question about what's the root cause is a good question. I think Jesus developed that theme of justice and mercy throughout his whole teaching. For example, in the Good Samaritan, it was the Good Samaritan showed mercy. He did something that he didn't have to do. There were other people in the story who maybe they were running late for an appointment. Maybe they thought, it's not my problem. They just walked past the man in need. And Jesus contrasts. He says, you are objects of God's mercy. You're like the people in Noah's day. You're not perfect. But God wants to show you mercy. He wants to rescue you from his justice. And he wants you to show mercy as you're able to people around you.
But still not problem solving.
Showing mercy is a great approach for us to take towards the problem solving. You're right that the root causes are often overseas. What we're doing is we're trying to respond to one of the problems. I've got a friend who I've been getting to know from Afghanistan who his section of Afghanistan is a war zone, basically. There's warlords with guns running the place. It's out of control. And part of the reason why that's happened is international intervention in Afghanistan. Whatever you make of the justice of that intervention, chaos has resulted in parts of the country.
And it's non-stop.
Jesus would want us to show mercy with the symptoms. With my friend who's come to Australia, he's seeking asylum here. He'd want us to show mercy in the way that we process his claim. And if he's a refugee, he'd want us to show mercy by giving him refuge in Australia. He'd also want us to show mercy in the way that we respond to any wrongs that are done to us. If we're the subject of terrorism in the future, we want to be just and merciful in our response.
All sounds really, really good, but if we just go back to Afghanistan and try to see the things historically, That's an almost 200 years old problem in there in Afghanistan. And the British went in to solve the problem 150 years or so ago. Then the Russians marched in, the Americans marched in, UN, everyone is there all through these centuries. And the problem is still there, so it's not solved. The problem is probably bigger than was before. So where is God's mercy in that to solving problem?
The Australian government's obviously given a lot of thought to our involvement in Afghanistan, and it's a situation that's been there for a while. Recent events have exacerbated some of that situation.
Yes.
And they debated it a couple of years ago, decided that we should continue in more and more limited ways our involvement in Afghanistan. What we're here to talk about is the question of refugees, so one aspect of the problem, or people seeking asylum as a result. Jesus taught that one day wars would come to an end, one day poverty would come to an end, one day persecution would come to an end.
And that was 2,000 years ago
He also
or
taught
more.
us that if we were to face the justice that will bring about a perfect world, we need God's mercy. And so we should be glad that God is delaying this perfect justice, because we need to be forgiven. Looking just at Australian history and immigration to Australia, there's wrongs that have been done in Australia that we benefit from, we live on the back of. One day, thankfully, Jesus will sort them all out. In the meantime, while we wait for that justice, we need to throw ourselves on God's mercy for any wrong that we've done, and act with compassion and mercy towards our fellow Australians and as international citizens. You're right that the political situation around the world is incredibly complicated, but it helps us to narrow down on just one aspect of it, refugees and boat people, and how in Australia this year, it's a new year, this year we can respond to this opportunity to show mercy, this incredible need and desperation on our doorsteps.
That's all really nice, and I like to hear what you said, Paul. I still got the historical problem with Christ want to solve the world's problem, want to see the wars ending, the poverty ending, so on and so forth. And we hear and somehow using the two big books of the Bible, the Old and the New Testament, and somehow, 2,000 years was not enough for us to get into the solutions. On that note, Paul, we have to go for a short break, but please stay with us, because we're coming back after the break with more discussion on refugee issues and the Christian view on that from Paul.